I did not cry. I did not beg. I just looked at my son, the boy I raised, the boy I stayed up with through fevers and nightmares and 1,000 ordinary Tuesdays, and I thought, so this is who you've become. Then I picked up my coat, walked out the front door, and didn't look back. That was 11 months ago. And if you want to understand why I did it, I have to take you back to the beginning. Because nothing happens in a vacuum. Every crack in a wall started somewhere, a small hairline fracture, easy to ignore, until the whole thing comes down. My name is Dorothy. I'm 67 years old. I live alone in a pale yellow house in Asheville, North Carolina, with 2 cats named Biscuit and Earl, and a garden that my late husband Wallace planted the summer before he died. The roses he put in are still blooming. Every spring they come back, stubborn, beautiful, full of thorns, and I think that's exactly what he would have wanted. For something he loved to keep going without him. Wallace passed 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end, which is a cruelty I would not wish on anyone. We were married for 39 years. We built a small upholstery business together out of a garage in our 30s, grew it into something real, sold it when we were in our late 50s for enough money to retire comfortably. Not extravagantly. Comfortably. We knew the difference and we were proud of it. We had 1 son. His name is Trevor. Trevor is 41 now. He was a good boy, genuinely good, the kind of child who would come home from school and tell you about the kid who sat alone at lunch, the kind of teenager who carried grocery bags for our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Hargrove, without being asked. I don't tell you this to make myself sound like a better mother. I tell you this because I need you to understand that what came later was not inevitable. It was a choice. A series of small choices that hardened over time into something I didn't recognize. He met Cassandra when he was 35. She was 32. She was beautiful in a very precise, intentional way, always put together, never a hair out of place. The kind of woman who arrives at a casual dinner party, wearing something that looks effortless but took 45 minutes to arrange. I noticed that early on, but I told myself it was just her style. Some women care about appearances. That's fine, that's allowed. What took me longer to notice was how she changed the temperature of every room she walked into. Not dramatically, subtly. The way Trevor looked at me when she was there versus when she wasn't. The way conversations would shift when her opinion entered. The way she had a gift for making you feel, without ever saying anything outright rude, that you were slightly beside the point. Wallace saw it before I did. He said to me once, sitting at our kitchen table about 6 months after Trevor introduced her, "Dot, I like that girl fine, but I want you to watch what happens to our son when she's unhappy." I didn't know what he meant at the time. I do now. They got engaged in the fall of the year Wallace was diagnosed. We were in the middle of the worst thing our family had ever faced, and I tried to be glad for the engagement. I tried to hold both things at once, grief and joy, the way you're supposed to. We had a small celebration dinner at their apartment. Cassandra showed me her ring 4 times and mentioned the venue she was already considering. I smiled through all of it because my husband was dying and I needed something to be okay. Wallace didn't make it to the wedding. He passed in February. They got married in September. And I want to be careful here because I don't want to sound bitter about that. Wallace would have wanted Trevor to move forward. He told me so himself in one of our last real conversations. He said, "Don't let anybody put their grief on hold for our sake. That's not love. That's just guilt in a suit." That was Wallace. He always could cut right to the thing. So I went to that wedding wanting to be present, wanting to celebrate my son. I had contributed $45,000 toward the venue and catering. Trevor had asked. I had agreed because I thought that was what a mother did. Because the venue they wanted was a converted Victorian estate outside of Charleston, and it cost more than some people's mortgages, and I thought, well, it's his wedding. It's once in a lifetime. What does money mean if not for moments like this? I know. I understand now what it means and what it doesn't. But at the time I wrote the check and I felt lucky to be able to write it. The wedding was beautiful. I'll give Cassandra that. Every detail was exactly right. The flowers, the lighting, the string quartet during the cocktail hour. Beautiful. I was seated at a table in the back left corner of the reception hall, table 11. In a room where I had paid for nearly half the evening, I sat at table 11, sandwiched between two of Cassandra's co-workers who didn't know who I was and didn't particularly want to. I found out later, from my nephew who was also a guest, that the front tables, the ones closest to the couple, were filled with Cassandra's family and her parents' friends, her people. I ate my salmon and I smiled and I told myself it was a seating chart mix-up. Or that Cassandra's mother had handled the arrangements and simply didn't think about it. I told myself a lot of things that evening. Trevor danced with his mother for one song. He held me the way he used to when he was small, and for those 3 minutes, I let myself forget where I was sitting and just felt grateful. Then the song ended and Cassandra appeared at his elbow, and he went back to her, and I sat down and I watched my son laugh at something his father-in-law said, and I thought, he looks happy. That's what matters. I drove home alone that night. I sat in my car in my driveway for a long time before I went inside. The house was very quiet. After the wedding, things shifted. They always do after a wedding. The dynamic that was already tilting moved further in one direction. Phone calls from Trevor got shorter. The visits we used to have, Sunday dinners at my place, occasional weekend trips, became rare, then rarer. When I called, he would answer, but there was always a quality of distraction in his voice, like he was in the middle of something and would have preferred to be let back to it. I started adjusting, calling less, not mentioning when I felt hurt, telling myself this was normal. Young couples need to build their own world. That's healthy, that's right. I kept my feelings to myself, the way I'd been trained to do, the way women of my generation were trained to do. And I told myself that being a good mother sometimes meant being quiet about what you needed. Then Trevor called me on a Tuesday evening, about 18 months after the wedding. He needed help. They had found a house. The house, he said, the one they'd been looking for. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, good school district, a backyard with actual mature trees. The problem was the down payment. They were short. The market had moved faster than they expected. They had savings, but not quite enough. And if they didn't move quickly, they would lose it to another buyer. He needed $60,000. I sat with the phone pressed to my ear for a moment before I answered. I thought about the $45,000 from the wedding. I thought about my retirement account, the money Wallace and I had been careful with for decades. I thought about the fact that I was 66 years old and not getting younger, and that $60,000 is not a small number at any age, but it means something different when you are not going to earn it back. I told Trevor I needed to think about it. He said he understood. He said, of course, no pressure, take your time. But there was something in his voice that suggested time was actually fairly short, and the next morning Cassandra called me herself. That was unusual. She rarely called. She was warm in that way. She had practiced, thorough warmth. She talked about how much the house would mean to them, about starting a family, about how Trevor missed having me nearby, and this house was only 40 minutes from Asheville. She mentioned, casually, that her own parents were contributing $30,000. She mentioned equally casually that without my help the deal would likely fall through. I thought about Wallace sitting at the kitchen table. Watch what happens to our son when she's unhappy. I thought about table 11. I said I would contribute $30,000, half of what they asked. I told Trevor it was what I could responsibly manage, which was the truth. He thanked me. Cassandra thanked me. They closed on the house 6 weeks later and sent me a photo of the two of them on the front porch with a key and a bottle of champagne. I was not invited to the housewarming. I heard about it afterward. My nephew mentioned it without realizing I didn't know. 30 people, catered, a whole afternoon event. Her parents were there. Her sisters were there. Her college roommates were there. I called Trevor the following week and mentioned carefully that I'd heard they'd had people over to see the new house. There was a pause. He said yes, it had been a last-minute thing. He was sorry, he should have told me he would have me over soon. Soon turned out to be 3 months later. I came for Sunday lunch. Cassandra was pleasant. The house was lovely. I complimented every room and meant most of it. I sat at their dining table and ate the meal she had prepared and told myself this was progress, that things were evening out. I drove home thinking about the roses in the garden. I thought about Wallace a lot on drives home from their house. I think because those drives were when I let myself feel what I'd been holding back all day. The breaking point when it came was not what I expected. I always imagined, when I let myself imagine it, that there would be some large, obvious thing, a clear moment I could point to and say, that's when it happened. But it wasn't large. It was a Sunday in January, a grey day, and I had driven the 40 minutes to their house because Trevor had called and asked me to come for his birthday. He said Cassandra was cooking, just the three of us, low-key. I got there and it was not low-key. There were 8 people there, Cassandra's sister and her husband, 2 couples from the neighborhood, Cassandra's work friend and her boyfriend. Trevor greeted me at the door and he seemed slightly surprised to see me, which was strange. He had invited me. He recovered quickly and brought me in and got me a glass of wine, and then got pulled into a conversation across the room. I sat in the living room. I knew no one. I tried a conversation with Cassandra's sister, who was polite but not warm. After about 20 minutes, Cassandra appeared beside me and said, in a low voice, that she needed a word. We stepped into the hallway. She smiled, but her eyes didn't. She told me that she appreciated me coming, but that she needed to be honest. She and Trevor had talked, and they felt that my presence sometimes made things uncomfortable. That I had a way of making Trevor feel guilty, even without saying anything, just by being there. That they were trying to build their own family and they needed space to do that. I looked at her. I felt very still inside, the kind of still that comes not from peace but from something else, something older. I asked her, quietly, when I had ever made my son feel guilty. She said it was the way I looked at him sometimes. I thought about $45,000. I thought about $30,000. I thought about table 11. I said, I see. And then I went and found Trevor. He was in the kitchen. When I walked in, something in his face shifted. I could see that she had already told him we were going to have this conversation, or that she was planning to, and he had decided not to stop it. That was the moment, actually. Not what Cassandra had said, but the look on my son's face, which told me that he knew and had let it happen. He said, Mom. I said, don't. He said that Cassandra had a point, that I needed to understand that they were a family now, that if I couldn't respect Cassandra, then these gatherings weren't going to work. His voice was careful, rehearsed. He said that if I wasn't willing to apologize to his wife, maybe it was better if I didn't come around for a while. He was asking me to apologize for the way I looked at him. I stood in my son's kitchen, the kitchen that existed in part because of the money I had given them, and I thought about who I was. Not who I used to be, not who I was afraid of becoming, who I actually was at 66 years old. After 39 years with a good man, after building something from nothing, after sitting at table 11 and not saying a word, I was someone who did not have anything left to lose by being honest. I said, I love you, Trevor. I will always love you. But I will not apologize for something I didn't do, and I won't be coming back until you're ready to tell me what it is I actually did wrong. He looked at Cassandra. She was standing in the doorway of the kitchen. She had her arms folded. He looked back at me. He said, then maybe you should go. I said, all right. I got my coat. I got my purse. I let myself out the front door. I did not slam it. I drove home the 40 minutes to my pale yellow house, and I sat in my car in my driveway, and I allowed myself exactly 10 minutes to cry. Then I went inside, made myself a cup of chamomile tea, and sat at the kitchen table where Wallace and I had sat for years, and I thought clearly for a long time. The next morning, I called my financial advisor. Wallace and I had always kept our assets organized, but I had not revisited my estate planning since his death. I had assumed things would be simple. Trevor was my only child. He would inherit what I left. But sitting at that kitchen table the night before, I had understood something that I think I had been refusing to understand for a long time. That the person making decisions in my son's life was not my son. My financial advisor put me in touch with an estate attorney, a woman named, well, it doesn't matter. She was sharp and thorough, and she had heard variations of my situation before. We restructured everything. My home, my remaining investments, the proceeds from the business sale. All of it went into a revocable trust. I remained in full control during my lifetime. The trust specified that any distributions required meeting with the trustee could not be assigned or transferred to a spouse, and included what my attorney called a no contest clause, meaning that any challenge to the terms would result in immediate forfeiture. I did not cut Trevor out. He remained in the trust, but Cassandra had no claim on a single dollar of what I had built, none, and the trust was structured to make that unambiguous. I also spoke to my financial advisor about my monthly expenses and my retirement, and I made some decisions about my time. I had been thinking for years about going back to something I'd let go. I used to restore antique furniture, back when Wallace and I ran the upholstery business. I had genuine skill at it. I found a small studio space in downtown Asheville. I started taking on pieces. It gave me somewhere to be, something to make, and within 4 months it was generating modest income that I hadn't needed but found I was proud of. I want to be honest about the months that followed. They were lonely in a way I hadn't been lonely since the first year after Wallace died. There were evenings when I sat with Earl on my lap and felt the silence of the house like something physical. I am not going to pretend that walking away from my son was easy, or that I didn't second-guess myself. I did. Plenty of nights. But I also felt, underneath the loneliness, something I hadn't felt in several years. A kind of solidity, the sense of being on level ground again, in my own life, in my own house, on my own terms. I heard nothing from Trevor for 6 weeks. Then I got a text. Just, "Hope you're doing okay, Mom." I replied, "I'm well. Hope you are too." That was all. 2 weeks after that, another text. "Can we talk?" I said I was available on Saturday afternoon. He called. He sounded different. Tired in a way that wasn't just fatigue. Tired the way people get when they've been holding something up for too long and their arms are giving out. We made small talk for a few minutes, and then he said he and Cassandra had been having some problems. I said I was sorry to hear that. He asked if he could come and see me. He came the following Saturday. He sat in the kitchen, the same chair he'd sat in his whole childhood, and I made coffee and I let him talk. It came out in pieces. Cassandra had been having conversations with her ex-boyfriend, texts at first, then phone calls. Trevor had found out by accident, had confronted her, and she had told him that she had been unhappy for a long time and that he had never really understood her. She had moved out 3 weeks before he called me, temporarily, she said. She was staying with her sister. They were trying to decide what to do. He put his coffee cup down and looked at me and said, "I don't know why I didn't see it." I thought about a lot of things in that moment. I thought about what it would feel like to say "I told you so," and how that would land and what it would cost us. I thought about Wallace, who never once said "I told you so" to me in 39 years, even when he would have been right to. I reached across the table and put my hand on my son's hand, and I said, "Sometimes we see what we need to see." He broke down then. Really broke down, the kind of crying that has been waiting behind a wall for a long time. I let him. I got up and got him a box of tissues and refilled his coffee and sat back down. I didn't try to fix it. I didn't tell him what to do. I just stayed. After a while he said, "Mom, I'm sorry for all of it, for the way things have been." I said, "I know." He said I was trying so hard to make her happy that I stopped noticing when other people weren't. I said, "I know that too." We sat in that kitchen for 3 hours. We talked about his father. We talked about his father. We talked about the business. We talked about things we hadn't talked about since before Cassandra, since before the wedding, since before Table 11. At some point, I showed him the studio I'd set up in the spare room, where I'd been working on a refinished mid-century dresser, and he ran his hand along the wood grain the same way Wallace used to, with the same careful attention. And something in my chest that had been tight for a very long time loosened a little. He asked me before he left about the estate planning. Someone, I don't know who, must have mentioned it to him. He asked me carefully, without accusation, what I had done. I told him the truth. I told him I had restructured things to protect what Wallace and I had built. I told him it had nothing to do with how much I loved him, and everything to do with making sure that my assets stayed where they were intended to go. He nodded. He didn't argue. He said, "That's fair, Mom." That was the moment I knew he was still in there, the boy who came home from school and thought about who was sitting alone at lunch. He comes for Sunday dinners now, not every week, but most weeks. He's staying in the house while Cassandra and he work through a legal separation. He's keeping the house for now, working with a mediator. I haven't told him what to do about any of it. It's not my marriage. It's not my decision. What I will tell you is this. I am 67 years old. I have aches in my knees that were not there 5 years ago. I get up earlier than I used to, and I tire more easily, and sometimes I sit on the porch in the evening and feel the particular ache of missing Wallace so deeply that it takes my breath away. I am not a young woman. I am not starting over in any dramatic sense, but I am living, fully and on my own terms, which is something I had quietly stopped doing somewhere in the years between the wedding and that grey Sunday in January. The roses are coming in again. Wallace's roses, the ones he planted the summer before he died. I was out there this morning in my old garden gloves, checking the new growth, and Biscuit was supervising from the fence post the way he does, and the air smelled like early spring, cold still, but with something underneath it that knows better. I thought about that drive home from my son's house all those months ago, how I sat in my own driveway for a long time, how I gave myself 10 minutes to cry. You know what I didn't give myself? 1 single minute to doubt the choice. Because when you reach the age where you understand that your years are not infinite and your dignity is not negotiable, something becomes very simple. Not easy. Simple. The difference matters. I have spent my whole life loving people. I intend to keep doing it, but love is not the same as surrender, and I am done confusing the two. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you would have done anything for? Have you sat in your car in your own driveway and asked yourself if you did the right thing? If you have, I want you to know something from someone who has been exactly where you are standing. You probably already know the answer. You just needed someone to tell you it was allowed. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that January afternoon. Not in any grand philosophical way, just the ordinary, honest kind of thinking you do when you're 67 and you've got time and quiet and a cat on your lap and nowhere urgent to be. What I keep coming back to is this. Nothing that happened to Trevor was a punishment, and nothing that happened to me was a reward. That's not how life works in my experience. What happened was simply the natural result of choices. His, mine, Cassandra's, playing out over time the way choices always do, whether we're watching or not. Trevor spent years making himself smaller to fit inside someone else's idea of who he should be. He stopped calling his mother as often. He let her be seated at table 11 and said nothing. He stood in his kitchen and rehearsed words that weren't his. Every one of those choices cost him something. Not because the universe was keeping score, but because when you spend that long bending yourself out of shape, eventually the shape you're left with isn't one you recognize. That's what I saw on his face when he sat at my kitchen table and cried. Not a man being punished. A man who had finally stopped pretending and was face to face with the distance between who he was and who he had allowed himself to become. And me. I spent years making myself smaller too. Swallowing things I should have said. Telling myself that being a good mother meant being quiet about what I needed. Every time I did that, I gave a little of myself away. Not to Trevor, not even to Cassandra, just away, into nothing. And the thing about giving yourself away in small increments is that it's so gradual. You don't notice until one day you're standing in your son's kitchen, being told to apologize for the way you look at him. And you realize you have been so busy trying not to take up too much space that you nearly disappeared entirely. Walking out that door was not a dramatic act. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt like finally stopping something that had been hurting for a long time. Like taking your hand off a hot surface and just stopping. What I want to say to you, and I mean this plainly without any performance, is that dignity is not something other people give you. It is something you either hold on to or you don't. And the times in your life when someone asks you to set it down, to apologize for something you didn't do, to make yourself less so, that someone else can feel more. Those are the moments that define not what kind of person you are, but what kind of person you are, but what kind of person you intend to keep being. I'm not a perfect mother. I made mistakes with Trevor over the years, real ones, and I own every one of them. But I know the difference between accountability and surrender, and so do you if you sit with it long enough. The roses Wallace planted are coming in again this spring. I was out there this morning with my gloves on, and I thought about how he used to say that the best thing about a perennial is that it doesn't need your permission to come back. It just does, because that's what it was built to do. I think people are like that too when they let themselves be.